Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we get started, I just want to make a shout out to Queerly Beloved, who is our sponsor this week. Whether you are queer or an ally, they have awesome merchandise that will meet all your desires, whether it's a hat or a shirt or a button or a sticker that has a message that says that God loves all people, including queer people, and that all people, including queer people, have beautiful things in them that God has placed there. So if you want to support that message, I encourage you to go out to queerlybeloved.shop. They have awesome merchandise. I'm wearing one of their shirts right now. It says God is trans. I really like this shirt because it reminds me of a few things. Chiefly that the image of God is seen not only in cisgender people, but also in transgender people. And also it reminds me that God transcends our constructs of maleness or femaleness. God is so much beyond that, even though the image of God is definitely seen in maleness and in femaleness. So go to queerlybeloved.shop, buy some of their merchandise, and support this awesome ministry. Probably the majority of the things that I'm going to be talking about on this channel have to do with sexuality. But like, what even is sexuality? When I have conversations with people about what they think sexuality is, and I've had a lot of these conversations, it seems people have a lot of different theories about what it is, but they really don't know what it is. At best, it seems we have very basic understandings of sexuality. Now follow this. Even though we don't really know what sexuality is, people tend to have a lot to say about homosexuality, or heterosexuality, or bisexuality, or transsexuality, or pansexuality, or any other type of sexuality. But they can't even tell me what sexuality is in and of itself. Now, doesn't that seem just a bit weird or a bit contradictory? People have so much to say about all of these different types of sexuality, but you can't really tell me what sexuality is in and of itself. Wouldn't it make more sense if we were to start with sexuality and understanding what that is, and then branching out to talk about the other types of sexuality? If you grew up like me, your introduction or exposure to sexuality was probably very nebulous or basic at best. I remember that the only things I really learned about sexuality had to do with sex, dating, and marriage. Those three things. Whether it was at church or at church school, whenever the topic of sexuality came up, it always had to do with dating or saving yourself for marriage, or it ended up being some weird PowerPoint presentation where you saw genitalia that had been affected by STDs. Yeah, it wasn't a pretty sight. It's pretty traumatizing, actually. Probably a lot of you guys can relate to the campfire sessions where guys and girls would split up and talk about sexuality, and that really just was dating advice and marriage advice. It was actually pretty terrible advice, if you ask me. But that tended to be our discussions about sexuality. It had to do with sex, dating, and marriage, and basically how to do those things right. Side note, those campfire sessions where we would talk about sexuality, it was actually kind of traumatizing because all it was a discussion for straight guys to talk about the girls they were going to be dating or getting married to in the future. And I was just kind of like, yeah, totally gonna do that. It didn't happen. So barring the traumatizing aspects of how we were exposed to sexuality at a young age, a lot of you guys are probably wondering, well, Paul, what's the problem with saying that sexuality is primarily about sex and marriage? It does, after all, seem pretty intuitive that sexuality has to do either solely or primarily with sex. I mean, it is in the word. Sex is in sexuality. Makes sense, right? Well, I thought so for years. However, once I actually came out of the closet and started processing what it means for me to be a homosexual, it led me to start thinking about what does it mean for me to be a sexual being in general? What does it mean for me to have a sexuality? As I continued my research, I came to some conclusions about sexuality that greatly conflicted with what I was told about sexuality growing up. As I studied sexuality, I realized increasingly that it has less and less to do with sex and dating and marriage, or even sexual orientation or sexual behavior or any of those things, and had more to do with relationality. Sexuality at its core just has to do with how we relate with ourselves and with other people and with God. In other words, anytime that you are relating with your parents or your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your siblings, your pet, yourself, or even God, you are acting as a sexual being. You are acting from your sexuality. This might be shocking or a news flash for some, but sexuality does not have to do solely or even primarily with sex and marriage. It just doesn't. It's about connecting relationally with yourself and with others in the world. Now, you might be kind of scratching your head at that, thinking like, yeah, right, Paul, I don't know if I believe that. Well, if you don't believe me, take it from the experts at the American Psychological Association. They're much smarter than I am, and I'm just gonna say what they said. I found this little gem when I was reading a text by the American Psychological Association, and it was very affirming and very beautifully stated. Much better than I can ever say it. So I'm just gonna tell you what they said. They say, the simple question, what is sexuality, has perennially defied any easy answer. Sexuality is the proverbial nested dimension of human experience. Individuals within relationships, within communities, within cultures. Sexuality cannot be distilled down to one essential element, but is composed of many. Sexuality can also be understood as fundamentally relational, not as something at all, produced in the interplay within or among individuals, interpersonal interactions, or institutions. Sexuality can be understood as a laundry list of individual and social experiences and attributes, including desires, behaviors, identities, fantasies, preferences, orientations, and identities at the individual level, and incorporating both mind and body, as well as sexual mores, laws, standards, communities, institutions, and cultures at the social level. Okay, so that was probably a mouthful, so rewind and pause and read that through maybe a few times. But basically, the gist of it is the APA agrees with me. Or maybe I agree with them, however you want to say that. What they're saying is that sexuality cannot be boiled down or reduced to just one part or even two parts. Sexuality has to do with a whole host of attractivenesses and expressions and relationalities. Now, there are two very big implications for me when I consider that sexuality is about relationality in general, just relationship with the world or with oneself or with one's God. The first implication is this: just because you are not married or sexually active does not mean that you don't have the ability to live your sexual best life. In other words, just because you aren't having sex, just because you aren't in a marital relationship with someone or even seeking to be in a marital relationship with someone, does not mean that you are not acting as a sexual being. Anytime that you connect with another person, you are acting as a sexual being. You are acting sexually, according to a certain definition. So we really need to stop that rhetoric that says, oh, if you're celibate, if you're not dating someone, then you're not living up to your full potential as a human being. As humans, God made us to connect with people in a wide range of different relationships. Each of these relationships comes from our sexual selves. Not one of them is more sexual than another, again, according to a certain definition. Thus, we can even say that we can say that Jesus is a sexual being. God is a being who connects with other beings in a very sexual way, in a very deep and a very intimate way. And because we were produced in God's image, we are sexual beings. How we are as sexual beings is not entirely different from how God is as a sexual being. The second implication is actually one that I want to allow you to chew on until I do a few videos about it in the future. In light of the fact that we have been considering that sexuality is not solely or even primarily about sex or marriage, what does that do for our understandings as Christians when it comes to thinking about queer sexuality? You see, we have been so programmed to think about sexuality in behaviors-oriented kind of ways that those who have more traditional or conservative views of sexuality, when they hear about homosexuality, they automatically assume that homosexuality or transsexuality or bisexuality, pansexuality are bad. Because according to a traditional view, if you want to have the wrong kind of sex or the wrong kind of marriage, according to those views, then you have the wrong kind of sexuality. But if sexuality is more than just behaviors, then what does that say about homosexuality or bisexuality or transsexuality or pansexuality? How does the fact that sexuality transcends sex in marriage cause us to reconsider queer sexuality or even straight sexuality? Are there things about queer sexuality and straight sexuality that lie beneath the surface that we've been missing because we've been so focused on behaviors when that's only one aspect of sexuality? At any rate, I want to leave you with that question to figure out what are the implications of now considering queer sexuality and straight sexuality not according to sexual behavior or just sexual identity or sexual preference. Since sexuality is not just about marriage and sex, but a whole host of different relationalities and expressions and attractions, what are the implications for how we should now go about considering queer sexualities and heterosexuality? If we haven't been getting sexuality right all this time, how can we be sure that we've been getting it right when it comes to all the different variations of sexuality that there are? We could be very wrong. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I hope it was very stimulating. Until next time, I encourage you to go out in your world today and experience the world as your best sexual self. Peace and God bless. Hey YouTubers, I hope you really enjoyed this video and I hope it was beneficial for you. If it was, I invite you to like, share, and comment below, please, respectfully. And also I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you are alerted when I release any more content. Thank you so much.